Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last week, we had the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Candace Holmes, and this week, we're going to continue our talk. If you did not get a chance to check the episode from last week, please do. We are going to continue our talk about neurofeedback therapy. I'm so excited about this topic. So once again, if you did not get a chance, tune into the part one of this episode, but we're going to continue our talk today with Dr. Candace Holmes. Thank you so much for being back on the show today.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I had such fun last time. So.
I know. I'm so excited about this topic. So last week we talked a little bit about, your journey with your daughter, her ADHD diagnosis, and how you kind of came to fall in to learn about neurofeedback and what it's done for you and your patients. I really want our listeners to try to understand the importance of really maybe exploring this type of therapy, right? So how can neurofeedback specifically benefit individuals with the autism community?
Sure. So people in the autism community, one thing they'll tell you, if you've met one person on the spectrum, then you've met one person on the spectrum, because
it's the truth.
A spectrum is such the right visualization of where they can be on there. Yes. And I've had patients I had this one patient who had 20 stims a day. So stims occur when it's a nervous response, it's an anxiety kind of response, an anxious kind of thoughts response. And so his was to do this. So he would do this about 20 times a day, 20 times a day, 20 times a day. And after working with me in my brain transformation acceleration program, he went to 1 to 2 times a month.
Wow.
So from 20 a day to 1 to 2 times a month. And he was just so excited. He was nonverbal, so he used a letter board, and just with his, telling me what happened, how, just the difference that it made in his life just brought tears to my eyes. Okay, I'm just getting choked up even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then I have, so also for emotional regulation. So typically they go from 1 to 100 at the drop of a dime, especially if something changes or isn't what they're used to, because it doesn't make them feel great, doesn't make them feel secure. And so I had one patient who, her mom said it would be World War III anytime something changed. And so,
sorry, I'm not laughing because I feel like I felt that way myself. So.
Oh yes, it's common. Oh, I'm telling you, parents totally relate to that. Yeah. And her daughter was upstairs, and she had to call her down the stairs. They came. This is when I was just doing the therapy in my office, and she said, well, "Let me tell you what happened." I said, "What happened?" She said, "I had to call her downstairs from her room," and I told her, what changed, and she just looked at me and said, "Okay." Turned around and went back up the stairs. She said, "My jaw just fell to the ground. Like, whoa, what just happened here? Like, what happened to the screaming, the yelling, the breaking down? Just what happened? It was gone. It was gone." Wow. And then I had another patient. So typically when you're on the spectrum, people say that they describe it as the children being in their own world, or the adults. I mean, it can go through adulthood. And this particular family had a lot of family gatherings, like almost every weekend. And so, the child would be, in their own element, just off to themselves. Well, after working with me, she said, I can't tell you how many family members came up and said, "Well, what are you doing?" Because she's talking to us, and she's interacting with her cousins, and she's, striking up conversations with her uncles and her aunts and everything. And they're like, "Whoa, what? What happened?" And she's like, "I'm just neurofeedback." They're like, "Oh, what is that?" Because it's really working. It's really helping. So those are some of the ways that neurofeedback helps to, retrain the brain and get those neural pathways formed so that those symptoms can get better. Hopefully my goal is for them to disappear. And, even if they decrease, it's, a lot better than progress. When they started.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've noticed, speaking to lots of parents, in the community, and I've even noticed it with my own son, is that you don't realize how much of a state of anxiety they could potentially be in, especially if they aren't always verbal. Like Drayson, Drayson used to be completely nonverbal. Now he speaks a little bit. He speaks more in fragmented sentences, and now his conversational skills are starting to open up a little bit more. But what I've noticed is that when he withdraws or reacts a certain way, you don't realize that they could be in a state of anxiety because they don't show it. And it's not like he tells me. He never says, Mom, I'm anxious. He doesn't ever tell me that. So it's like, I don't, so you have no way to gauge unless you're really under a very close observation of your child and you really are tuning in intuitively to your child. Otherwise you miss it. Exactly. And I just had this conversation with a group of parents the other day about that. Like if you're not observing, you're going to miss it. You have to go into that state of observation. So I love that the neurofeedback can potentially also help with some of these secondary problems, if you will, more of the behavioral type of things. Because I think the initial reaction is, and we've been told when he gets older, you might want to consider anti-anxiety medication. And that's upsetting because it's like, well.
Yeah, like it's a norm.
Right. And so it makes you wonder. It makes you beginning to wonder, well, what else can I do? You know, and I think as a society as a whole, sometimes we're in a natural state of anxiety and don't even realize it sometimes. But,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that fight or flight. Fight or flight.
Yep. And I feel like even as a mom, sometimes I enter that state and I don't even realize I'm there because I'm so, it's like I'm on autopilot and then all of a sudden now it's there.
And last year I was at a conference, it was one of our chiropractic conferences, and the speaker had to break it down to some of us that we've been in a constant state of stress like our whole lives, and like the fight or flight has always been on, and after it's always on, guess what? It's just normal to you. Like I didn't realize, like I'm from Detroit, and we live in a wonderful neighborhood. I mean, full of educators and everything else. But I've experienced some things, so constantly, aware of what's going on. I don't have my back to the door when I'm at a restaurant. I know where all the exits are, like all those things that from my life experiences, and I'm able to verbalize that. So think about someone on the spectrum who can't tell you all of these things, and their experiences are no less than mine, so just being able to open up just to decrease that anxiety and get them a little more comfortable so that they're still aware but not having that freak out moments and, from day to day.
Do you find that they're also then, once they start going through your patients who have gone through neurofeedback therapy, do you find that they're also able to articulate their emotions a little bit better after going through neurofeedback?
And that's saying that someone can go from, nonverbal to verbal, just being able to better formulate the patterns of the words, the structures of the sentences. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is that there's a misconception that they have no feelings or that they don't care, or because they don't show the emotion. At least Drayson, sometimes when he was younger, he wouldn't even show emotion. I didn't even know. I'm like, does he even care? It's like you're not sure, but I think there's a lot of people don't realize that they do have very strong feelings. They're just not physically showing them. Which then is
we're
almost
trying to see those cues.
Right. And I'm trying to bring that out because I want to know. I want to be curious about it. And I think that's what's been one of the most difficult things for me as a mom. Now that he's older and he's expressing himself more, we're definitely not running into that problem into teenage years, but
It's like someone who is speech delayed, and then they get, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but tubes in their ears or whatever they have to do, and then you can't shut them up. It's like, oh my gosh, I said, be careful what you ask for. It's like it's coming.
I know,
it's
right?
coming.
So you've shared some of the unique outcomes and success stories with autism, but is there, you've said a few. Is there any one in particular though that really stands out to you specifically with autism that has been one of your greatest, I guess, triumphs?
The one with the 20 stems was the most for me. He's in his early 20s. He was 23, and he was taking a college course, and his sister was in the class. They were waiting for the professor to come in, and he has a unique gift and ability to recognize people's energies
Mm-hmm.
and auras and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
he said that they were, well, his mom said they were in the class and everything was great until the professor walked in. And the professor, he said, he just started freaking out. He's like, he told, we have to leave now. We have to leave now. And sister's like, what? So they're getting up,
Yeah.
like, what happened? And he said, he just saw, he said, evil is what he said, just evil.
Mm.
And I was like, whoa, that just to be aware and to recognize that, just because they are maybe less than or deficient in
Mm-hmm.
how we would see it in some areas, they have other abilities that are heightened, so
Yes.
just
Yeah.
a lot of people don't like to acknowledge that part. And I totally acknowledge
Oh,
that. I mean, when the
I,
mom told me, she said, well, he's going to read your energy when you come in. I'm thinking, oh gosh, I hope
oh
I'm
yeah.
okay. Like,
I always say how intuitive Drayson is. Like Drayson can pick up, I mean, he can, it's crazy how he reads a room. And if he's not, if he doesn't gravitate towards you, there's a really strong reason for that. Like it's
something's
just,
wrong.
yep. It's the intuitive, he's so much more intuitive than I gave him credit for when he was younger. Now I try very intensely to pay attention when he reacts that way. But it's very interesting because I never realized that was kind of a secret talent of his, like, whoa. And I love the fact, like everyone that knows Drayson says, I love him because what you see is what you get. And I'm like, oh yeah, there is no sugarcoating with this kid. He is just, that's it. There's
Boom.
nothing else in between.
That's it. And how wonderful it would be if we could, as adults, learn from,
I know. Trust me. I'm like, oh,
that would
such
be
an admirable quality.
yes. What superpower would you like to be blessed with? Like, ooh,
Yeah, he's like, no, I
to
wouldn't
know
pick.
who's actually true and who's not.
Yeah, he's like, no, mom, don't pick that one. So now, can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the challenges you've seen in traditional mental health treatment approaches that neurofeedback helps to address?
Sure. So, for example, with ADHD, a lot of times people are so stuck on or thinking that the child is lazy and they don't understand how the brain works. And I remember before I knew, that's what I was calling my daughter. I was like, oh my gosh, everything's disorganized. You can't just clean up your room. And I just don't understand. And, just so lazy. And, the titles that we give our children. And then, recognizing. So with ADHD, the best way it was explained to me is, remember how we used to have dial-up back in the day for internet connection and nobody could be on the phone. Don't get on the phone. I'm getting on the internet.
Don't pick up the phone.
Ding, ding. Oh my gosh, dun, 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 just waiting. And so imagine half of your brain is on dial-up and the other half is on high speed. And that's how an ADHD brain is. And so the high speed can only come down and the dial-up can only go up. And so they need to connect. But there's a disconnect there. And so the reason why those who have ADHD are so hyper and they're so impulsive, they're moving around so much is because they're trying not to fall asleep. They're trying to stay awake. And I was like that doesn't make logical sense to us. And that's actually what's happening. So why don't we address the diet? That's one of the things people would ask me about my diet. Well, what are you feeding her? I'm like, our favorite food is salmon. Like we do the broccoli, we eat the asparagus, we have the Brussels sprouts, we do the salads. Like that's not an issue. Now I did ruin my children with sweets. I will admit that. We have cookies and ice cream and those kind of things. However, we eat well so that we can have this balance, right?
You can have that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then water. We don't put enough emphasis on drinking water. A lot of us aren't sick. We just are dehydrated. And so not only that, but also drinking alkaline water. Alkaline water is beneficial for the brain. And also, it's a better form of hydration for the entire body. The majority of foods that we eat and the drinks that we consume are acidic. And guess what diseases love? Acidic environment. So if we drink alkaline water, we start internally and go out and make sure all those processes, all those waste products are coming out of your system too. And then sleeping.
Yeah.
My brother works for a telecommunications company, and he is a manager over systems, so not over people. And he said, I can't tell you. He said, the first thing I ask people, okay, when was the last time you shut the system down? And the average is like 383 days. He said, okay, so what if you didn't sleep and reset after 383 days? I mean, just like with our phones. If we don't
Right.
shut those things down, why is it so slow? I just don't understand. Well, same thing. We have to get that adequate amount of sleep. Children need more sleep than we do, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
give them the opportunity to get that, or they have challenges with it. So that's one thing. Another thing that neurofeedback addresses is the insomnia, so that to make sure that you can get into those deep stages of sleep. Because
Mm-hmm.
guess what? When you're sleeping, that's when everything heals. That's when everything refreshes and
Mm-hmm.
regenerates, and any read that you can think of. That's what happens while you're sleeping. Those
Right.
memories are formulated and stored, in your brain. So if you're not getting enough sleep, then I tell people you might as well just stay up. I'm like
Yeah.
what like
Well,
what's the
and
point?
up until 2 years ago, Drayson never slept through the night. I mean, he'd be up 3, 4 times a night up until a couple of years ago. And so we tried everything under the sun. I think it was also him just also growing up that was helpful for us.
Hmm.
He kind of grew
Hmm.
almost like grew out of it. And we were
Hmm.
really, really fortunate to that happen. But I still talk to parents all the time that are like, yeah, my kid will wake up and 1 o'clock in the morning be wandering around the house or come and wake me up. I mean, it was to the point where my husband and I weren't getting sleep. And
I was,
so just for us to get up with him, it got to the point where we would literally like, okay, are you going to take a turn tonight? Because I'm just going to go sleep in his room with
tag
him.
team,
I'm going to go sleep in
tag
his room
team.
with him because I can't even bear to get up again. Like I'm so
Yep,
exhausted, I'm so tired, then you worried about all the other psychological components with that because it's like I want him to
exactly.
become independent. I want him to learn how to be self-soothing, but
Mhm.
you're in such a point of exhaustion that you're like, I care more about trying to get sleep right now than I do about like trying to get him to
Anything
just go back
else?
to sleep on his own. Like
Absolutely.
let's just go to bed and be done. Like,
Path of
so
least resistance.
yeah, and it took us years to get him into a state where he could sleep through the night. And for the first time, just recently, last week, he said to me, usually every morning, I'm like, "How'd you sleep, honey?" And he'll say, "Good." For the first time ever, he said to me, "I didn't sleep well." I said, "You didn't sleep well?" He's like, "No, I just did not sleep well." And we were in the car driving to school and he was super sleepy. And I said, "Son, do you want to stay home and rest today?" Like he just looked so tired. He goes, "No, I want to go to school." Well, that night he came home from school and he says, "I'm going to bed early." What? Like, I
Okay.
mean, just, yeah, like,
Right.
what? Like, I mean, but to the fact that he could understand that about himself, he was auto
Yes.
regulating, like, and he knew, but
Hmm.
he had just had a bad night of sleep. But he never came in the
Hmm.
room to tell me. It was like the first time he never came in the room to wake me up. But he told me he had a really bad night of sleep.
And that's a little victory in itself.
It,
It's like
it
I
was.
was
I
about
was
to get
like,
I was about to get
yeah,
about to get my
I know.
pom poms on that. Like
I know. I was
listen.
like, yay! But then I was like, oh, poor baby. I hope he's okay.
Oh, right,
But
right. It's catch
it's
22.
yeah, it's like, but you're teaching. I'm trying to teach him that these things are really, really important now because he's older and old enough to understand. When he was younger, I mean, I don't think that he quite grasped the concept of that. So, but I think you bring up such a wonderful point about sleep. People do not realize how precious our sleep really is in order for us to
They don't.
regenerate, recuperate, all the above. Like
Hmm.
it's just so,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
important.
And, and the studies show that you aren't able to make up any sleep. And I say,
Right.
well, I'm going to do my best to try and see if I can. Like if I can take a nap, I'll take a nap. It's like I remember my brother came to visit and he was like, "You're taking a nap?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm taking a nap. Like I have time. Like I need to
Yeah.
make sure I can try to regroup because it's so important." So yes,
Yeah.
those are the things that neurofeedback can address that most other doctors don't even
Don't even
ask about.
realize. Yeah. So
Mm-mm.
now how do you help patients overcome a little bit of skepticism about this? Because, we do come, unfortunately, from a very conditioned society where it's like, oh, okay, you have a problem. Let's write you a script or let's get you this medication, right? Let's give this to you because this is
Mhm,
going to Band-Aid the problem. So,
mhm.
how do you help patients overcome a little bit of that skepticism or doubts about non-invasive therapies like neurofeedback?
Mhm. Well, one of the things I impress upon them is that neurofeedback first started out with helping epileptics. decrease their seizures.
Really?
And
Okay. That's interesting.
and neurofeedback was given grants. Grants were given from the government to investigate and to research, neurofeedback. So there are tons of articles out there on how it helps with ADHD. I remember one year the American Pediatric Association was like, hey, this is I forget what the level is, a top level therapy for helping with ADHD. And I was like, ooh, that's going to help,
Yeah.
And then all just mainly the research articles are very helpful. And this has been around for over 50 years. It's just most people haven't heard about it. And I can be a conspiracy theorist. I know we don't want to get into that. However,
Yeah.
yes, mainly the testimonials that I have. The recorded testimonials, the written ones. It's just something. Just like with chiropractic. Chiropractic wasn't known or accepted. Thought that it was something. Out of the ordinary, is because we didn't rely on medication. And so now people are like, oh yes, I see a chiropractor all the time. Or, like one of my friends is a medical doctor, and, we're around the same age group. And she said that she gets adjusted all the time. She says all her colleagues don't say, oh, you don't know what you're missing. Like you have no idea. So it's the same thing with neurofeedback. It's been around for over 50 years, and now it's just coming into. So now I think that parents are and people are more aware of how important mental health is, and it is part of your physical health. Like you have to address that, because too many times we compartmentalize things. Oh, that's over here, that's over there. No, you're one body. Like I have integrated brain body method, because everything works together. Everything starts in the brain. So let's get the brain working well, and everything else will flow from it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's too just shifting the mentality of going from, the cookie cutter of practice medicine, right? Like it's deviating away from that. And like I said, we've kind of become very conditioned as a society. Oh, I have a symptom, I'm going to go see my doctor. Or, oh, I'm going to,
purpose.
Yeah. And oh, do you have something for that? Like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Can you give me, I need something for that. And so I think that we've become conditioned. I mean, and I was just giving this analogy the other day. When I was a kid, the commercials were fun. Commercials were fun.
Yes.
And it was about like the latest toy or the food or whatever. But now it's like you see a ton of ads for medications. I don't remember seeing ads for medications so much. And then when they give the rundown of the side effects, I always laugh because I'm like, is it worth it? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Explosive diarrhea does not sound fun for me. Like,
no,
it's like,
what I want to experience.
Like, what? Like, but we still conform. We still conform to that. And so I wonder sometimes, like, how do we encourage, families and people to consider maybe other alternatives that might be helpful for them before, to me, I feel like the medication has to be the last resort, the very last resort.
Yes.
But
yes.
And don't get, and folks, for you guys listening, listen, I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to get political about any of this, but it really is about taking care of yourself. And that is what is so important is that you really take care of yourself in some capacity, right? So,
one of the things to remember, other countries, that they have people who live long. They're outside, they're eating well, they're eating clean food, they're drinking the water, they're doing all those things. So, the blueprint is already there.
Right.
Yeah. It's just that we're so blinded by, and question, if your doctor is doing this or doing that. And you're like, why, because when we're growing up, we're taught not to question authority, and I tell people doctors know a lot about a little. We know a lot about a little, and that's why there's so many specialties, because, it all works together. So, do your research and make the best decisions. It's just, my whole thing is, wouldn't you rather try something that's natural than something that's synthetic?
Yeah.
So you rather try something that, was made by man versus something that was made from
I
the
feel
earth.
like we've gotten complacent. We've gotten into that mindset of convenience, it seems more convenient to do that versus something else, or whatever the alternative is. I feel like we've kind of, and I know I've fallen victim to it myself, so I'm not saying that
sure.
it's that I haven't, but it's like you fall into that matter of, well, it's convenient, it's easy. So, what does a typical neurofeedback session look like, and how can someone get started with treatment?
So in my office, we do a discovery call it's a complimentary discovery call just to see, because not everybody is a candidate, because honestly, it takes a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've had one parent call in and then the other parent isn't on board. And I said, I don't play that game. I need you all to be in the same accord because this isn't
Yes.
going to work. And then after that, then they come into my office and have a consultation, or we do it virtually because I have a national practice. And
Mm-hmm.
I like to have, if it's a child, I like to have both parents present, or, all the caregivers, everyone who, is focused on that child, or if it's an adult, their
Involved,
spouse, their
yeah.
best friend, their mother, whomever, because those people outside of that person experience them differently. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've had consultations and the dad will say what the child does, and mom's like, I didn't know they did that. And I'm like, yeah, and then vice
Yeah.
versa. And the dad's like, oh, I didn't know they did that. And I'm like,
So
it's
glad we're
important to get
talking. Yeah.
that's why we're here, kind of like a counselor of some sort. But yes, and then the next step, if they are after that consultation, is to have the brain mapping. And so again, that's a functional assessment of the brain. It takes about an hour or so. A report comes out, and then I meet with them again, and I go over the report, and I make a recommendation for my programs based on that report. Because again, every brain is different, so
Mm-hmm.
that's how that works. And once they decide to start the program, then if they're outside of the state of Georgia, then I ship the equipment to them, and then we meet on a Zoom, and I show them how to set up, and then they get started. Otherwise,
Okay.
they'll come to the office and get the equipment.
So it can be done virtually. It's not something that has to be in person per se. It's something that you can do
The
virtually.
Correct. The
Mm-hmm.
training sessions. Now the brain mappings, unfortunately, we can't do that virtually. But what I'll do is I
Right.
will send you to one of my colleagues that's close to you. So you don't have to. I've had patients offer to fly in. I'm like, you don't have to. There's
I'll send.
somebody like 30 miles away from you or something, like, I said, I appreciate that. And some of them even still want to fly in. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just
It's
saying,
okay. Yeah.
this can be done. And then all that data is sent to my computer, and I manage the cases remotely.
Okay. And how long have you been doing their neurofeedback for now? Because you said you started when your daughter was
Almost a
13.
decade. Yeah,
Wow.
almost a
Okay.
decade. Yeah,
Oh
almost
wow.
a decade. And it's 85% of my practice now. It's like all the transformations, like, I wrote a book about it. It's just so fascinating. It's
That's that's just amazing.
just to see those changes.
And I wanted to ask about your book too. That was actually one of my next questions that I had for you. So now you just recently published a book. Is that correct?
Yes, last
Okay.
year I did. July of
Okay.
last year.
And what's the
Mhm.
name of the book?
It's called Transform Your Brain with Neurofeedback. I happen to have a copy right here. Transform Your Brain with Neurofeedback. Yes.
That's
Yes.
wonderful.
Oh,
And
thank you. Thank you.
and so now is that something that parents can is this book for anybody? Like if they're interested in learning more about neurofeedback, they can read your book and kind of educate themselves
Absolutely.
and know what steps to
Absolutely.
take
And, and
next.
and I wrote it so that it's easy to follow. I'll give you some technical terms, but I'm not trying to have your eyes glaze over from all the science, because I understand. I meet people where they are, and you don't need to know all that. It's like,
Right,
let's just give
right.
you the information, tell you what some options are, what other therapies my patients have tried before coming to me. And typically a lot of them are like, oh, I wish I would have known about this earlier. Same thing with my
Yeah.
daughter. If I knew about it when she was 7, I'm like, how much, that would have, changed our lives, around 7 as
Amen.
opposed to 13. And then I also have to remember that everything happens for a reason and at the time that you're ready for it. I mean, I was in denial when she was 7, so I wouldn't have been looking for anything
You
because she
would have
didn't
been
have
open to
ADHD.
it anyway. Yeah.
No,
And so
no.
and I know we mentioned this on the first episode, but really this can be done at any age if they fall into the right parameters of being a good
Absolutely.
candidate, correct?
Correct. There are some conditions where it takes the brain up to 2 to 3 to 4 times as long to start making
Mm-hmm.
those changes as it would with someone who doesn't have these challenges like Parkinson's,
Mm-hmm.
autism, those with learning differences, and those over the age of 75, and then under 7. So even the 5 or 6 year olds, it's just the consistency.
Right.
My eldest patient is my dad. He played football in college, and back then, there was no baseline for concussions. He said, I can't
Oh
tell you how
yeah.
many times my bell was rung. And he used to tell me that he has CRS. And I'm like, central respiratory CRS. What? Like I didn't learn that in school. I'm like, what is that? And he said, I can't remember. I was like, oh, okay. And so I was like, well, let's get you in here and do this neurofeedback. And so we've been doing neurofeedback on him, and he doesn't say that anymore. And he's spry. He'll be 87 this year. He's just he's and his siblings are jealous because their children don't have neurofeedback therapy. It's like, so we need to fly down there and stay with y'all for a couple months so we can get our brains together. And I just laugh. But yes, now some people use it as a preventative measure for dementia and Alzheimer's. It's important that it's early onset because once the brain tissue has died, it doesn't regenerate. There's nothing I can do about that. Yes. So right. I have one of my bridesmaids lives in Texas, and she and her sister have noticed that their mom, is having some memory challenges and everything. I said, now is the time to do something about that when you notice it, as opposed to when did you start noticing these things? Oh, about 5 years ago.
Yeah, right. Because then that's it. So it would probably and like you said, the results can vary depending on the condition. So some sessions might take more sessions than others to start Correct. Seeing those results. Okay.
Correct.
And what would you say the average is? Oh, go ahead.
So those, I was going to tell. So a straightforward case where there's no hormonal challenges or metabolic issues typically start seeing changes around 30 sessions. Okay. In my programs, I give the unit to use over weeks at a time, so you can get better faster because you're not relegated to a certain number. So typically 30 sessions can be achieved in 2 weeks. So and you'll get better a lot faster than if you were coming to my office 2 to 3 times a week.
Right.
Who has time to do that?
And so once those benchmarks are kind of hit, then do you then change the frequency of the therapy? Like, is it
right?
Like, so then it's not necessarily 30 times in 2 weeks. It's whatever.
Well, so on my end, after they finish the training sessions, then I look for that pattern to see that they've mastered that protocol, and that's when I set up another time for them to do another brain mapping. Okay. So. Yes, so it varies from person to person. The best thing about that is I've had over in almost a decade, I had one person whose brain was just like super fast on making the change. It's like, woo! I was like, woo! I said, like, you're ready now. Like after 2 weeks, she was on it. Like, and I was like, wow, okay. I said, so I need to make another appointment for you to come back. She's like, well, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, you're done. Like, we don't need to do that protocol anymore. So when they get another brain mapping done, the changes are displayed. So you have a objective finding that shows the progress that you've made, which is another thing that I love. I'm still a scientist and I love it. I had one patient who has her doctorate in education, and she was in a really bad car accident. I mean, the car rolled. I mean, it was pretty bad. A tire iron came, grazed her forehead. She had concussions. She was depressed. She had anxiety. She was writing a book at the time and couldn't write anymore because she couldn't form the thought. It was not great. And I met her at a networking event, and I told her about what I did, and she declined, and I was seeing other events, and just her ability to speak and form those sentences was just declining, and then I think it was 2 years later, she came and she was like, okay, I got to do something. And she started, and, I recommended a longer program because hers was a complicated case, and she and her husband were like, oh, we just want to try this little part here. And I said, okay. I said, it's just like it's a small piece of what you need, but that's fine.
It's so hard to be toeing the water. Yeah, you can't.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was keeping up with her, and I sent a little text message. Yeah, she was doing something. I'm so glad you asked. She said, oh my gosh. I said, I'm sleeping longer. I'm in a better mood. My kids aren't getting on my nerves. I'm starting to write again. And I said, so are you ready to do what I recommend? She said, oh my gosh, yes. So they extended the program to what I recommended. It was time for her to come back in to have another brain mapping, and her husband said, I don't even need to see the brain mapping. I know I got my wife back. And I was like, wonderful. Whoa. And she's like, no, I still got to see the data. So
she wants to see
it. Of course. Yeah. She wants to see the data. I said, I get it. And of course, she had improved, drastically and dramatically. So it just brought me such joy just to know that, he noticed the symptoms were decreasing, and, she was getting back to herself, prior to the really bad car accident.
That's amazing. I have to commend you for all of the hard work and dedication that you've given to, your family and to patients that you've helped serve. I think it's just absolutely commendable, everything that you've done. And I appreciate your time today on the show. Before we get off today, I do want to ask you, what's one piece of advice maybe that you might offer to a parent or individual who's struggling to find maybe effective treatment options for their neurological condition?
Look outside the box and be open to other ways of of addressing a situation. It's just like, when I was growing up, there was a phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yes.
Look for the other ways.
Look for the other
Look for the other
alternatives.
ways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great
Absolutely. Just
advice.
be
That's good
open.
advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you.
today, Dr. Holmes. I greatly appreciate you. For those
My
of you
pleasure.
listening, I'm going to post Dr. Holmes' information in the show notes. So if you would like to reach out to her, please do, especially if you're interested in maybe a consultation or you want to check out her book. I will have all those details listed in the show notes for you guys to reference. So please check it out. Once again, Dr. Holmes, thank you so much for the wonderful and enlightening conversation. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Well, this concludes our episode for today. If you have questions, comments, or even a show topic that you'd like to hear about, please feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook or Instagram if you haven't already, or feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Pieces for My Puzzle. If you like what you're hearing, please spread the word to others that this might help, and feel free to give us a good rating on your preferred podcast platform of choice. Until next time, thanks for tuning in and keep working on your puzzle. And remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.